friends and family, neighbors, people across America that watch YouTube. I'm just a little tired today and I look a little rough, but I have committed that I'm going to make a YouTube video every day, if at all possible, because the YouTube channels that I watch, I keep a note of when their videos are going to come out because I really look forward to them. And it's always exciting to know that we're going to have a YouTube video to watch in the evening or something after dinner. So um, I have found out that that's one of the things that's really, really majorly important, that you be dependable. And if people do go to the trouble to watch you, that you be there to entertain or whatever it is, whatever kind of lift they get from it. Um, but like I said, I didn't sleep again too much last night, and I got up relatively early this morning. I've done a lot of work, so I don't know, and I can't seem to get the settings just right on this screen. I look a little yellow. The dogs are already doing their thing. They do that from morning till night. They get up in the morning doing that and they go to bed doing that. But I have them trained really well. I have a little bit of trouble with my lower back. It's not horrible, but I have a little bit of trouble with my lower back. And I've got Noogie sleeps on this ottoman right here behind me. It's kind of like a footstool. If I can get my finger up there, yeah, it's kind of like a footstool. And Rhonda, who, by the way, is named after the Rhonda Valley where Sean James Cameron is living, but she sleeps in this rocking chair. My mind's kind of all over the place today, but I had mentioned that I have my dogs trained good. So I got Noogie first, and he was a wild thing. He stayed under the couch for 3 days because he had been traumatized, and I seem to always get the traumatized ones. Rehabilitation seems to be my thing. But it took a long time. I had just lost two puppies, and one of them was an old dog I'd had for a long time, and I was really, really in a state of sorrow over my dogs and dying. And somebody gave me Noogie, and it was sort of against my will, and he was a wild character. But when I said I've got him trained good, and I mentioned my back, having a little bit of trouble with my back, and he sleeps on this ottoman, and she sleeps in this rocking chair. And but I've got them trained that when I'm gonna hook them, they got a leash on them at night. So when I'm gonna hook them, if I don't put a leash on them, they're running across the bed like you see them doing here, and it just doesn't make for a good night's sleep. So when I'm gonna put a leash on them, I say get in your bed, and they'll jump up. She'll jump up in the chair, and he'll jump up over there, and they'll wait for me to put the leash on them. And so I wanted to add that. I've got one of these bent wood rocking chairs. And when I've always wanted one because in the East you can buy them at the Amish stores and the Amish make them. And when I come here, and people were very, very, very generous here. So when we moved into this trailer, there was no no furniture. It was pretty rough. Um, but they were as helpful as they could. And the landlord has storage units here, and some of the storage units get abandoned. People leave their stuff behind, and so um, he said that they have kind of like a yard sale. And so he said, whatever you see, whatever you want. And I just love this Bentwood rocker. So God is so good to just come along and give you little things to make you happy. And and it just takes the little things. You don't have to be rich or live in a fine home or, you know, sorrow's plenty in this world. You're going to have sorrow, but you can find joy in small things. So always look for the small things to make you happy. I'm watching Noogie. So I had said yes in yesterday's video that I was going to talk and do a video on the pirate's heart. And sounds good. Sounds like a Netflix or something, but I got to thinking about it, and really it's, when you think of a pirate, you think of a killer or a thief or somebody that's evil or bad in their heart. I'm not really going that way. I'm thinking along the lines of Crusty or a hardened warrior. So I may make a subtitle to this video, why a lot of people don't like me. I am not a popular person. And the people that do like me have went to the trouble to truly know me at the heart level. And when I say they don't like me, I would say that they tend to shy away from me. That's not because I'm a bad person or that I'm mean. It's because I'm pretty truthful, maybe too much. I'm pretty open. But we're going to get into that. Why some people don't particularly like me. And it's okay. I don't have an issue with that. I've lived too long on this earth to have major issues with who likes me and who doesn't like me. But getting into this, I'm going to call him a hardened warrior. And getting into this, I have met quite a few, and I'm going to use the example of a man, and I'm going to use an example of a woman. But I'm really old-fashioned, and I know a lot about history. I've lived a lot of history. But I have met men and women, but I'm going to start with the men first, that the type. They have rough hands. They've worked their whole life, maybe farming, maybe doing mechanic work, or, whatever the reason. They've worked really hard and they've got rough, calloused hands. They can have all sorts of characters, because I've known some that had a mean streak and weren't necessarily nice to be around at all. And I've known some that were softies and sweetie pies. I remember a tale of an old farmer. Now, I didn't meet him personally, but I knew his granddaughter. And I heard tell of this old farmer, and he had worked really, really hard, raised a really big family. And he got down and he was in the bed. And when the grandchildren would come to see him, they just all pile right in the bed with him, And the stories they told of his grandchildren cuddling with him in the bed, and that was his deathbed. He didn't get up, but his grandchildren and great-grandchildren loved him. And he was a really sweet man from every account I've heard. I have known some that their families were borderline afraid of them. One in particular is coming to my mind, and all of his family practically shivered in his presence. He never scared me. Maybe it's because, I never was afraid of him. Um, it takes a whole lot to scare me. Um, I've just seen a lot, done a lot, and been through a lot. So it takes a whole lot to scare me. And, but sometimes those crusty, hardened warriors aren't particularly pleasant, but they're truthful and they're honest generally because they have no real reason to lie. Why would they lie? They don't care what you think. They're just going to tell you the truth. Now, that doesn't mean that they don't have a kind heart or that they're not listening. But one of the reasons during the wars in early England, especially during medieval time, some battle life, some actually go to war. And that veterans, they go off to war and they see their buddies die, and they live out, where, some of them, they've had to walk for miles in wet boots, and they get jungle rot on their feet, and they may go hungry and be cold, but they suffer these things that make them hard. They harden like a sword that's been, how they stick it in the water and then they pound on it some more and stick it in the water and pound it. That tempers the metal. And sometimes people get their metal tempered. Um, I know where I want to go with this, but it may take me a little while to kind of catch the fish. But I'm sure most of you have seen the kind. You can look in their eyes and they may be a little hollow look, and in between their twinkly blue eyes. There's a sense of sadness sometimes. But they're not much for foolishness. And when I use the word foolishness, I'm thinking of the way they use it, kind of old-timey country. People a long time ago, they would say things like, I'm not going to put up with that foolishness. Well, it wasn't really being foolish, because you think of foolish as being somebody that's daft or not smart or, something like that. That's not what they're talking about. They're talking about actions, ideals, opinions. They could have said that about, somebody fighting and carrying on in the neighborhood or whatever. But the old timers weren't up for foolishness. Now, that's talking about the men. Women that have hardened metal, grit in their soul, they got a backbone, they can come across as being a little harsh, a little frank. They can come across as not particularly happy sometimes. Now, with me, and I think I probably take this after my grandma, I got a giggle. I giggle. So when something strikes me kind of funny, I'll giggle. And you've seen me do it on my other videos. So, my grandma, and I'm not ashamed to name her, her name was Amy Florence Perkins. She was born in 1898. She had 11 children. She was an herbalist. She was a midwife. She was a stout Christian, went to an old-time Baptist church. But by the time I come along, she had plenty of grit in her soul. And she would state opinions that people didn't particularly like sometimes. And she would kind of get on to you a little bit. But I love to snuggle with her on the couch. All right, I was talking about my grandma. She's been my inspiration for life because she, like I said, she raised 11 children, and those children were grown and married, some of them, because she had kind of like two sets. She had some that were born real early on, like when she was like 20, and then she had some that was born, you know, they were young adults during the war, so they, you know, they saw the Depression. And a lot of them had went from, they lived in Kentucky. So a lot of them had left Kentucky and went to Cincinnati to work because they had married. But when the Depression hit, almost every one of them come back home. Because Grandma and Grandpa had a 40-acre farm, and she had a cellar where she kept 400 mason jars full of food, and they killed hogs and milked cows and had chickens and eggs, and Grandma knew how to cook for big crowds. And I remember going to her house when I was a kid, and she always had a kind of like a little crystal jar on the table, and she had her jams and jellies and stuff on the table. So many stories. I could do an entire video of stories about her having her children and being the midwife in the community and working with people. But she had grit. And two stories in particular that I want to tell are she had went out in the woods. Of course, back then, it's been deforested now, but back then, across the street, a road, dirt road, and as I remember it as a child, it wasn't really dirt. All those, everything around there was white sand, and it was so sandy. You'd have to go into archaeology to figure that one out. Kentucky, white sand in Kentucky, but that's what it was. But if you crossed the road, it was just forest. None of that's there now. None of those trees are there now. But if you cross the road, and I think out there in that woodland was where they had their outhouse. But anyway, she had went out in the woods, and there was a man and a woman out in the woods that, as she would put it, ought not to have been together. The woman was married, and the man she's with wasn't her husband. And Grandma saw him jump up and run off, and she hollered after him. She said, "You needn't run. I done seed you." Kind of sounded like Grandma clean food. But she wasn't afraid. And then there was a man got drunk, and all the children went to a one-room school. And I don't even know, this was a long, long time ago. My grandma died, I think, in 1975. So, but all the children was at the schoolhouse, and they had this little woman school teacher, and she was young and kind of timid. And this old drunk man went down there to the schoolhouse, and he was banging on the schoolhouse, and she locked the door, and they were all afraid and crying, and she is scared. And somebody slipped out and run to my grandma's house to tell them that he was down there and he was tormenting the children and the school teacher. Well, Grandma wasn't afeared. She had grit. and her sword had been turned over several times. And she just grabbed her a stick, and she just went right down that road and went after him and run him off because she wasn't afraid. She wasn't afraid of high seas or the devil. Now I'm going to put a little excerpt in here because I have several accents. And you're going to, according to what I'm talking about, you're going to see these accents come out. So I was born, as I told you, in Ohio, not too far from Cincinnati. And I went to school up to the 8th grade. I later, in adulthood, got my GED. So I hadn't added that in any of my other ones, but I did manage to get my GED. But I had stayed in Ohio until I was 14, so I have an Ohio accent. It's tainted just a little bit with hillbilly. Even when I was going to school, because all my people were from Kentucky, they would tease me sometimes about talking country. I am not from England. I've already made that clear. But I am very, very British. I've had my DNA done, and I'm about 97% British. A little bit of Scottish. Got just a teeny weeny bit of Scandinavian, but for the most part, I'm British. We were talking about, the tempered sword, or if you've got a good old hickory butcher knife, it's tempered. And I love them old hickory knives. I've got to get me one. There's so many things I've lost because of being homeless and losing everything that I had, that I'm slowly trying to get things back. But God is good. So I was talking about my accents. I have a very Ohio accent that comes out sometimes when I'm talking about my parents or my childhood. And then I have this down home country accent that kicks in when I'm talking about my grandparents, because I've lived a lot of years in Kentucky, and so all that stuff rubs off anyway. And then later on in life, I moved to Alabama. And when I moved to Alabama, it was real easy to transfer that Kentucky accent to that deep South accent where you talk real slow and life is slow. And sometimes people from the eastern United States, they'll say, "Where are you from?" Because my accents are all over the place. And a lot of times they guess me from Virginia or North Carolina because it all just blends together and makes kind of a soup. But I watch so much British TV that's rubbed off on me too. And so every now and then I'll cut in with a British accent. I don't do it very well, just like for fun. I don't just cut in and start sounding like I'm from London or somewhere on purpose. I don't do that very well. But you will hear me cut in and I'll have a British accent. I don't do any of these on purpose, and it's not for show, but I will be all over the place with my accents. Now, getting on, I was talking about my grandmother, and she wasn't afraid, and she was tough, but she was so sweet, and she was so loving. And I just loved to cuddle with her, and I loved it when I'd sit down by her on the couch, and she was already old, but she had a soft body, and I'm kind of like her, I think. I got a pear shape and kind of soft, runs in the family. But anyhow, I'd cuddle up to her. And then there was another woman that, uh, and for the sake of her family and somebody that might watch this video, I'm not going to give her name for privacy reasons. But she run an orphanage. She kept foster children, and she was old in life at the time she did this. And she had gray hair and probably had braids that were 3 or 4 feet long, and she'd wrap them around her head like this. And she had a gold tooth, and she raised strawberries, and they had honeybees, and her husband would have a fruit stand. But she raised so many children, and she fed and took care of so many people, and lived in a big old house that had bedrooms and little apartments and stuff. And it just worked and cooked, and she wore cotton dresses and always had one of them full over the shoulder, aprons and calicos and stuff. And my grandma dressed like that too if she wasn't going to church. But when she was younger, I heard him tell the story. Her husband, who was a good man, he decided he was going to come home drunk one night. And she met him and broke a kitchen chair over his back. He never did do that no more. And I've heard, I know some of her grandchildren, and she could be in the garden, and they'd be a big snake come through the garden, and she'd pick that snake up by the tail, and she'd do this, pop its head right off, just like a lasso. They had to be tough. And you get tough, and you don't always mean to sound harsh. You don't always mean to be critical. It just, and it's stuff like stuff just, now, Noogie, you got to be quiet. No. I'm going to make this little snippet that I can put at the end of some of my videos, simply because I tend to ramble on, and the videos may get too long. And if I have to cut it off, I would like to have a sense of goodbye closure to the video. Now, I would appreciate it if you would like, subscribe, comment. It would be really, really helpful if you hit the bell button so you get notifications, if you would hit the like button, and if you would comment. If there's anything that you have to say to add to what I've got to say, please comment, and I will be more than glad to acknowledge that I've read that, unless I get to be such a big YouTuber that it's too many and I just can't do it. But for now, please comment, and please like my video and subscribe, and I will see you on the next video. Bye bye.